without further ado, I would like to welcome Guy Tall, who will be presenting Deeper Peering. Guy is a Senior Director, Product Management. Guy is a Senior Product Management at Lumen, formerly CenturyLink. This is Guy's fourth time presenting at NANOG. Guy's first talk at NANOG was a foray into MPLS at NANOG 39 in 2007 at Toronto, Canada. Did I say that right? All right, cool. Welcome back, Guy. We are very happy to have you presenting today.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Boy, I guess I just like to pick the cold weather climates to present in, I guess. Well, thank you. It's good to see as many faces in the crowd as we have here. My talk is called Deeper Peering, but really what it comes down to, this is more of a talk about measurement, inertia, and adaptation. So wait a minute. I know like a bunch of you thinking, wait, no, this is supposed to be about peering or de-peering or something, right? Well, it's about everything. It's about all those things. So I think at a gut level, everyone sort of knows that it makes more sense to have deeper interconnection with everybody. You want your source and your destination to be as close as possible. Why is that? Well, over the last 20, 30 years that that I've been doing this anyway, we've seen the rise of converged services onto the IP core. So VPN, VoIP, CDN, gaming, all these things that are bandwidth intensive and need low latency to perform the way that the application owner wants. Well, where are we going next? We have more video, more CDN. We're going to see AR, VR, SD-WAN, SASE, edge services, all relying on lower latency. So I think at a fundamental level, we sort of know that it makes sense to connect in more than just the 9, sort of tier 1 interconnection markets in the US. And I'll preface this by saying this is a US-centric slide deck. I have a similar one made for Europe. I'll give you the punchline from that at the end of this one. But this is going to focus on US. So not only do you get better performance, but you'll also be able to get better cost economics. A lot of the access circuits coming in now actually cost more than the IP component of the service. So, if you could buy a circuit in Minneapolis here instead of having to haul down to Chicago, it's better for you as the customer. If there's peering to support it, so that the traffic, stays local. So this is all kind of fundamentally made sense, but you have to measure to know if it actually bears fruition. There's an adage that if what you don't measure, you can't manage. So this is the first part. Here's some initial thoughts I had about why aren't we already doing this, since it kind of fundamentally makes sense. So I think one of the biggest hurdles are that there's architecture that everybody built their networks 20, 10, 5 years ago and didn't incorporate the ability to have these deeper interconnections with each other. So, either from a PE management perspective, there's networks out there that still have customers on separate routers than peers. You have to update route reflection, DNS. It's a lot more complicated than just turning up a circuit between two networks. The capacity planning starts to become more onerous. If you turn up a lot of capacity to somebody in Minneapolis and Chicago, if Chicago goes away, all of a sudden does Minneapolis take up that slack? Does it go to New York? Does it go somewhere else? So it gets a lot more complex as far as capacity planning. And then the inertia part is that there's this, inertia, of procurement people buying circuits, from whatever state they're in into one of these markets because they know that there's not a lot of interconnection in that market. So why buy it local? You can go to the bigger market, get a better selection of vendors, lower prices, everything that entails. So fundamentally, these are kind of the biggest hurdles to overcome. But, this slide kind of was the beginning of the journey for me. Because what happened was we had an implementation engineer tell me, hey, we just turned up, we got 1 T of capacity with a single peer in Chicago. Oh, wow, that's great. Is that a lot? Yeah, I think so. I think they're our biggest peer. Well, or who's number 2? I don't know. Do we have a T with anybody else in some other market in the US? I don't know. Okay, so time to start collecting some data. So, So what ended up happening here is that, Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas ballooned up to the top of the 9 markets in the US. And with the exception of DC right here, which I think is sort of a, phenomenon of the Northern Virginia data center market more than anything. There was a really, really heavy weight on just those 3, inside the US markets. Now, the US, years and years ago, used to be a lot more central part of the internet than it is today. The Europeans would come and buy capacity on the East Coast. The Latin Americans would come buy capacity in Miami. Asia would come in, buy in Seattle and California. But we're starting to see that decrease now. So what I would have expected, because they're doing a better job of keeping their traffic local. So what I would have expected was that the capacity should mirror the US population a little bit closer. And we actually did see that. But so 40% on our network of the capacity was in the US was in the 9 major markets were Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas. And so that kind of did bear out. It was pretty consistent with what we saw from a population perspective. About 40% of the US population all live within those 3 markets. 24 out of the 50 states are buying their circuits into those markets. So, working at Lumen, had access to a lot of data. We sell more than just IP. We have VPN, VoIP, the whole gamut of services. So I was able to see the A side and the Z side of a lot of these circuits. And, pretty much what I was expecting here was that, you sort of have this gravity well here around Chicago where 20% of the population of the US, is buying either capacity directly into Chicago or, somewhere nearby, but it would all have to go to Chicago to switch off net. And we saw the same thing down here with Dallas in the Southwest, and in the Southeast here, it's pretty much all Atlanta. All right. So that was the idea, and we had some data to support, what we were seeing actually in the ground. And so it came time to say, all right, what are we going to do about this? And we've already known, again, we sort of presupposed that the idea would be is the result of this is that we're going to need to interconnect deeper. And so now it was creating the methodology of how do we pick those next slate of interconnection markets in the US. So the 2 biggest rules, or I guess the things that we weighted the heaviest, were the MSA population density, and to follow the fiber. That's tried and true. Where do you interconnect? We also looked at RTT to nearby tier 1 markets. Where were people already interconnecting? Because we don't want to break that inertia of where there's already people appearing. And we've actually been a little bit ahead of the curve here, where we've been talking to our peering partners saying, hey, we see lots of flows from, whatever, South Dakota to Wisconsin, and let's exchange that in Minneapolis instead of Chicago. But, we also looked at things like GDP. That does make sense on a state level. In the European analysis, it came a little bit more to the forefront from a country perspective. And then, like number of data centers, number of ASNs, again, that was kind of more Europe-centric than US, but still, that was the decision-making factors. And so here's the tier one markets as today, just to give a comparison. We can see the number of people here in the MSA. That's a metropolitan statistical area. So instead of just looking at a city, it also looks at the suburbs around it that depend on that city. GDP of the state here. And kind of, you see, top 15 or so are pretty well represented. So in our slate of tier two markets over here, we kind of fill it out a little bit with the MSA and GDP. We did number of data centers just to keep it consistent. This peers column here is the number of peers that we have as a network. So, you can see here that we've been, pushing Denver and Phoenix pretty heavily for a while, and we already have some, pretty good interconnectivity there. A lot of our peers say we're, one of the biggest peers in those markets, not surprisingly because of our footprint. But I would like to add that this is not something that's sort of, self-serving. When I chaired this thing and when we started, arguing over the tier two cities, we didn't take things like, who's the prevailing data center in the market or internet exchange or, who, what ISP is the incumbent or MSO. This is just, purely off of numbers, population, GDP, RTT. And so, here in Minneapolis, it already had a pretty relatively thriving internet exchange. We also saw quite a bit in Boston, which was good to see, a little surprising for me. But so here, we have these RTT levels, and by adding this slate of 9 interconnection markets, it lowered the average RTT across the entire US by nearly 8 milliseconds, which, kind of makes sense. You see here, Philly and Boston are a little bit lower, but that was to help offset New York City, which had, 17% of the population and a little less than that as far as the interconnectivity ingress-egress. But so we needed to offload that a little bit, but the main goal was how do we help offload Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas? Cleveland made the list here because by itself, it's not that interesting per se. I mean, sorry to any Ohioans in the audience here, but once you add Columbus and Cincinnati, which are relatively close, Cleveland skyrocketed up to number 6 as far as population and 10 in GDP. And then we saw the same thing here with Nashville, where it was kind of in the 30s, but if you add just Memphis, and there's also Knoxville, and you could even make the argument of parts of Kentucky, it also jumps into the top 20. And that's going to be important to help offload Atlanta. So the light blue here is the tier 1 markets, and then the dark blue are the tier 2 markets that we're proposing as an official slate of tier 2 markets. And you can see here how the emphasis is to kind of fill in the center of the map a little bit. Again, with the exception here in the Northeast where we had to break up New York a little bit. And this is what it looks like where not only you have the local interconnection in the market, but all of the neighboring states get benefit from that as well. So just because you don't have an interconnection point in Albuquerque, going from Albuquerque to Phoenix is, not significantly, but somewhat closer than going to Dallas. Up here in the north, you'll see even greater gains. So you have again, this sort of gravity well created where, again, and I went through and looked at not every single circuit, but we kind of filtered it. And a lot of these circuits that were going into Chicago or Seattle actually go on this physical path, especially if it was going here to Northern California. But we see this here as well, and definitely up here, where it makes sense that you can break your circuits out in the middle there, or just order new circuits, or whatever. Oh, the other thing I should mention too is that this was only the access to the data that I had at Lumen. So if someone goes and builds their own network and meets us in one of these markets, obviously I'm not going to see where the Z end of that is. So even the numbers that I have, I know are much lower than what it would truly look like if you could take all of that into consideration. But just wanted to throw that out as a caveat for people that are checking me on my data analysis skills. So getting there kind of catches us up to where we should have been now. Again, 20, 25 years ago, all of the peering was happening in Northern Virginia, Northern California. Then Chicago kind of got added to the map, and Miami and Atlanta. But it was growing pains, and it took 5, 10 years to get everybody to interconnect in some of these markets. So by adding these tier 2 markets, we kind of catch up to where I feel we should have been today. But this is the next step of where do we go next? And so I had one of my data interns over the summer put together this map showing, the increase in the MSA population of all of the top 50 or top 75 US markets. And you can see here, again, a little surprising to me until I saw the data, was that the southeast of the US has been growing much more rapidly than the rest of the country. So what we need to do next is start having the conversation of where are these, even beyond this next 9 slate of markets, where do we go after this so we don't get behind again? So, again, I just kind of threw this table together. No decisions have been made, but, just kind of things that would make sense, following again, inertia, where are people already connecting? Well, some of these markets, there's not a lot, at least from our perspective. With the exception of Portland, that's starting to build up. And again, not surprising, follow the fiber and all of that. But, there's interesting, North Florida makes sense. From this previous slide, you can see that, Florida is just exploding from a population density, Orlando, Tampa. And, from the slide before that, you could see that in North Florida, they don't actually buy going south into Miami. They mostly buy up into Atlanta. So that would be a good place to kind of, cut things out. Charlotte was, one of the largest bubbles there. The size of the circle was the, increase of the percentage. Detroit could make sense. A lot of the fiber coming into the US out of Canada actually goes through Detroit, so that could be a better place to break out. Certainly better than Chicago is, which is where a lot of it goes today. Cleveland in the tier 2 markets would be a good place to break it out too, but Detroit would make sense. Southern California is huge. Either San Diego, maybe Riverside would make sense in the future. Breaking up the Northwest a little bit more, adding, Portland, Vegas, Boise, from an RTT perspective, certainly makes a lot of sense. Maybe not as much from a MSA perspective. So this is the long-range planning that we're just now endeavoring to start. So I promised you at the beginning I'd show you the punchline from the same study that we did for Europe. These are sort of the 7 tier 1 interconnectivity markets in Europe. And we did the same thing, looked at A and Z ends, population, RTT, et cetera. And this is the slate of 7 tier 2 markets that we're going to start pushing from our perspective with our peering partners. Marseille, some people could argue, is already there. It almost is. It's pretty close, but we don't quite have everybody there yet, but it's close. But some of these other markets here, again, the main goal here, there wasn't a triangle of Chicago, Dallas, Atlanta, but Frankfurt here was the 800-pound gorilla of Europe. And so a lot of the work went into looking at fiber routes and populations and seeing, how do we keep the Central and Eastern Europe traffic local. So to summarize, in the US, we have an over-reliance of connectivity in these 9 markets. There's huge swaths of land that, causes, over 20, 30 milliseconds to switch off net, 1,000 miles. You have this idea of social inertia where people are buying their circuits remotely instead of locally because it's sort of this chicken and egg, why buy it local if it's just going to go remote to switch off anyway? So we want to be able to reinforce, buy local, switch local. And, again, as I mentioned on the first or second slide, our internet is not just a project anymore. There's billions, tens of billions, trillions of dollars of business that people are putting on the internet, and we have to adapt and, be responsive to the future, the present and the future of where the internet needs to go. So, this isn't the first time I've given. This isn't the first time I've given this presentation. I've seen Sylvie give it before. Tom Paseka has given it before. So really, what makes this different than some of those other presentations? And that's that we have just updated our peering policy to say that not only are we going to expect interconnection in the tier 1 markets, but at least to start off with 2/3 of the tier 2 market that we've proposed. So a little bit of data, a little bit of policy, and we'll open the, mic for questions or any questions that have come in online.
We don't have any right now. But any questions from the audience? I see John.
It's John Christoph. Have you done analysis on what the breakdown is of the current peers who may be leaving and the addition of what you might gain, so the percentage add or drop from this change in policy?
You mean how much traffic would migrate from one of the tier 1 to the tier 2 markets?
No, just if a network would actually not satisfy your peering policy to be able to peer, or would qualify.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that we are cognizant of, that there are some networks that don't operate in some of the markets that we're proposing. And so that's why, we're not trying to mandate all 9 or all 7. We're going to say we want the majority. We kind of settled on 2/3 to give us about 6 out of the 9 markets in the US and 5 out of the 7 in Europe. We think that's a reasonable number because, again, not to get into the peering policy philosophy too much, but we kind of want to peer with other networks of our scale and size. So, it's not asking too much. But again, we recognize that not everyone's going to be able to meet us in every one of these markets, and so that's why that little leeway was built in.
We have one online question.
Sure.
From Matt. Will this be accompanied by relaxing peering requirements to allow more local peering in those tier 2 cities?
Well, that was the peering requirements, other than adding this one, were not changed. So it's still, again, kind of harking back to my last answer. We're looking for, peers of similar scale, size, scope. So the policy doesn't change just because we are expanding the geographic reach of the interconnection.
Hi, Chris Whitfield, Twitter. Are these new peering requirements going to be applied to new peering applicants only, or is this going to result in any de-peerings of existing peering partners that don't meet those requirements?
So again, we're not creating this to create any friction or de-peering events. We do expect, again, that there's going to be some networks that don't operate in every one of these markets. So again, we built some leeway in there. Maybe we revisit that in the future, but there's no plans to do that. But I guess to answer the basic part of your question is yes, it applies to new and existing peers.
Thank you.
Got another online question from Jonathan. How much traffic do you expect to move from the Tier 1 cities to the Tier 2 cities?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for you. I would say my gut would tell me that we would probably see a shift of about a quarter of the traffic, at least, maybe more. But that's just, again, my gut feel. There's nothing behind that other than, what I think will happen.
Round of applause for Guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everyone.